Welcome to the Firehouse Roundtable podcast, brought to you by the Ventura Fire Foundation. I'm one of your hosts, Peter McKenzie, retired fire captain with the City of Ventura Fire Department, and my co-host, Jason Kay, active battalion chief with the City of Ventura Fire Department. We are going to bring awareness to real issues that face firefighters and their families. We want you to feel like you have a seat at the kitchen table, which every firefighter knows is the heart of the firehouse. Let's get right into the episode. All right, welcome to another episode. Today we have James Boomhower. James, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I was going to talk a little bit about your bio, and I'm looking at your what you do, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to mess that one up for sure. So why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
That was the first time it was like a deep sigh, maybe lost for words. That was good, Peter. Just let James take it over and tell us about himself.
Yeah, I would have botched it because I was like, critical care, and then I know the fit for duty, and I go, oh, forget it. Let's let him say it.
I appreciate it. No worries at all. So my formal medical title is a critical care transport specialist paramedic. That's with Boston MedFlight up here in Boston, Massachusetts. I am also the founder of a mental health and suicide awareness program called Stay Fit for Duty.
Awesome. So we want to hear about all that. Obviously, we focus a lot on mental health, and it's a pressing issue in the fire service, or not just fire service, the whole first responder community. And I understand, I want to know what motivated you to start the nonprofit. Kind of tell us what your story is. And you came highly recommended to us from some previous guests, and so we're excited to have you. I think it was a couple people that were like, no, you need to have James on the podcast.
I'll take that.
So you're here, and I want to hear. Let's hear your story. Let's get into it. So take it from wherever you want to take it.
That is flattery at the finest. I hope I do it justice. Let me start with appeasing the tax man. Stay Fit for Duty is not yet a nonprofit. It is in the process of becoming a nonprofit. Just in case the tax man hears the hears the podcast, right? But we're making it happen. So just a little bit about background. I've been a paramedic for just shy. Well, I've been an EMS for just shy of 20 years, and a paramedic for about 16 of those, with 9 going on 10 of them being in the critical care transport world. I've done every facet of emergency medical services you can do. I've worked alongside police and a tactical paramedic realm. I've done municipal. I've done fire-based. I've done critical care. I've done fly car. You have a branch of EMS. I've done it. And the stories are so similar, whether you're at the firehouse, whether you're in a hangar, whether you're doing like concierge paramedicine, just the need for not only mental health, but culturally informed mental health, and mental health with a tune of recognizing what we do, right? And I work really hard to ensure that line is drawn at whoever helps somebody else at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? It doesn't have to be just fire-based, doesn't have to be just EMS, doesn't have to be specific to law enforcement, right? Those extra bits are really important. But if we say, okay, have you ever walked into someone else's home at 3 o'clock in the morning to render aid? Then beautiful. You're on this side of the line. If you haven't, you're on this side of the line. Just to best understand the worldview and how we all interact day to day, and give a real sense of awareness and camaraderie when I can say, I've been in your shoes and I have training to help you, and I can point you in the direction of mental health services, or I can give you those mental health services myself. So when we talk about the need for the culturally informed mental health provider, I realized that there were a few out there for sure, and there are some doing fantastic work, but that I could be one of them. I've done a ton of work in the peer support space. I've done a ton of work in the critical incident stress management space. I am a critical incident stress management instructor, and I thought that was all really impactful and really helpful to help our brothers and sisters in this space. But over the last 2 years, I have nearly completed my master's in clinical psychology and am now in my internship as a counselor. So I can not only work to help my boots on the ground, as it were, right, my professional colleagues in the medical and first response space, I can take on that next level as a counselor, and I can work deeper with some of those individuals. And what I really think is just as important is now that I am in a space where I am becoming a counselor and have the metaphorical street cred, as it were, to sit in the space and to do the things, I can help create more culturally informed therapists. I can be that perfect bridge of the guy that's done the job for 20 years, and the guy that knows all the verbiage, at least most of the verbiage, right? I'm almost done with school, and can really articulate the questions that fellow mental health professionals have. And what can they say to a fledgling mental health professional that they might not have the comfortability or access to ask, certainly couldn't ask one of their clients, right? But how can we help build that bridge and create more culturally informed counselors without mandating that they have a 20-year history in the first response sector?
Gotcha. Going through all the training on the mental health side and the professional training with the master's degree in psychology and all that, what can you tell the people that are on our side where you came from? Like what about going through all that training was unique, or did you have any aha moments, or was there anything? Because I think people in general aren't like super fond of psychiatrists and therapists, right? Like, which is normal, right? Especially with the whole culturally competent thing is reducing that. But having gone through that, what's your opinion now that you've seen the inner workings of both groups? Maybe
totally.
Maybe that's
I think the profession as a whole is really working to change its image, right? Like the era of me sitting on a chair that's 10 feet above you and you on a tiny little couch, things like that. There's a component of that in the space, but really it's just two humans communicating with and working with one another. And I think unintentionally, one of the things that we've done on the first responder side of the coin is we've put culturally competent on a pedestal, right? And you can really overanalyze that to death. Like, sure, he's been a paramedic for 20 years, but he was never deployed, so he can't work with veterans. Oh, well, he was never a sergeant in the police force, so he can't work with law enforcement leadership. When if we really zoom out and say, what do we need? And how can we create individuals that are aware of that? Within the mental health industry, we're changing the terminology of competent to informed. We're changing the definition of informed to curious. My own personal therapist is not an EMT, paramedic, Leo, nothing. But they were one of the group of crisis responders that showed up at 9/11. And that alone, that desire to help those first responders without a ton of first response acumen under her belt was really a big push for me to give her a try, for lack of a better term. And just the awareness from a first responder sector of, I can point you to a bunch of people that might not know the difference between an EMT and a paramedic and may not know what inch hose you're supposed to roll out at XYZ fire, but really care about the population and really want to help the population. And I think that that's something that we should really pay more credit to, those people working really hard to provide good care specific to us.
So maybe we're being too narrow. Like we're putting all these guardrails on and probably excluding maybe some good people.
Yeah, I think we need to widen our lens just a little bit. And I know it's ironic. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here before I even get licensed, but I think we went from, we'll take anybody that'll listen to us for 5 minutes, and that's not good either, to you have to have a career in law enforcement, you have to do this, you have to do that, or we can't trust you. There's a beautiful middle ground somewhere in between, and I'm working really hard to help create what that looks like.
What made you want to become a therapist or a psychiatrist?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I'll start there for sure. So a counselor or a therapist has a master's degree level of education. A psychologist holds a doctorate. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor or doctor of osteopathy, right? So some formulation of medical physician who is studied in the field of psychiatry. I'm going to start as a therapist or a counselor. Those two terms are essentially used interchangeably. And then I will eventually go and obtain my doctorate. So I will become a psychologist once it's all said and done.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying.
Of course, my pleasure.
So what made you do this? Why did you want to go back to school and do this? Was there some sort of personal experience? Was there a need you saw? Like what kind of motivated you to go down this path?
Tremendous self-loathing and too much money in my bank account. I said, I got to get rid of both of these things. I have way too much free time in my hands. No, as I mentioned, I did a ton of work in the peer support space. I helped create my agency's peer support team. I've subsequently, and Stay Fit for Duty has helped create a number of other peer support teams in the first response sector. I truly love the idea of peer support and think that peer support is an invaluable metric within the mental health and wellness of the first responder. It's also really important in times of crises and in psychological distress. And it's a phenomenal tool that will never be underutilized. However, there's a cap to it, right? That there's just a point where you can only go so far. It's in the name, right? Like as a peer supporter, I can only get so far. And I really wanted to not only be in a position where I could oversee those peer teams with more legitimacy, but I really wanted to have that knowledge and do that deeper work as a singular mental health professional.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, I think sometimes people get curious about something and they just keep going down the rabbit hole, and eventually, I mean, you worked yourself into a total another career, which is awesome. Do you see yourself leaving the EMS side and just doing the therapy side, or are you going to continue to do both?
I'd like to continue to do both for as long as my back and my brain will let me. I really, truly enjoy the work that I do on the critical care front. I am blessed to work with world-class clinicians and world-class equipment and do really good work for the people of New England. And I still truly love the job that I do. I'm also rounding 40, so I consider myself young-ish in the profession, but someday I will absolutely hang up the helmet, as it were, and put the stethoscope down and go full-time into the mental health space. But for now, I not only enjoy living in both spaces, as occasionally exhausting as it can be, but I think it still gives me a tremendous amount of validity with my peers, right? Of like, oh, no, I saw this dude on a helicopter yesterday. Like he's still very much living both worlds, and I think that gives me a ton of credibility.
Yeah, awesome.
You said you're currently a critical care paramedic, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so what does that mean in the West Coast verbiage? Are you on an ambulance? Are you in a hospital? What are you doing right now?
Awesome question. So that part of the reason the title is so long is because they didn't know what to make us. Boston MedFlight operates 3 vehicles. We have our own ambulances to do ground critical care transport. We have our own helicopters to do aeromedical transport, and we have our own fixed wing to do long distance, traditionally less acuity, but longer distance. So the entire verbiage of that sentence pays homage to the fact that we're not flight medics, we're not ground medics, we're some derivation of the two, but we're always providing, or at least able to provide, critical care and ICU level care medicine.
So you do currently, you're kind of, I don't want to say on call, but you could get any one of those assignments any day of the week.
Correct. So our assignments are 12-hour shifts. And in a perfect world, we're assigned, James is going to be on the helicopter in Bedford today. But if we're down for weather and there's an EMT that can get us going in the ambulance, we'll hop in the ambulance and do that. So as many of us can appreciate, we'll call it a fluid situation when you're on duty. But we are limited to standard 12-hour shifts unless we're doing like an overnight transport in the fixed wing. Otherwise, it's just 12-hour shifts from there.
Okay. Another thing that popped my curiosity was you said you originally were a CISM instructor, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I feel like CISM kind of evolved into peer support.
Yeah.
Is that where you guys are at too? And do you now have more peer support teams? Do they fall under CISM, or how's that work?
So Boston MedFlight's team is a combination team. They have International Critical Incident Stress Foundation training. So they are proper critical incident stress management, and when needed can deploy critical incident stress debriefings. But a vast majority of the work we do is peer support. It's one-on-ones, it's buddy checks. It is much less formal diffusings, debriefings, things of that nature, and much more peer support. All of the teams that I help train fit that model as well. I think what some of us have found, and I don't want to speak for too wide a stretch, but the benefit of like peer support ending and then another team in polo shirts coming in to provide like the formal diffusings and debriefings, I think is where some of the disconnect occurs. So as many of our colleagues can attest to, we found like, let's train you here. Let's get you prepared to do all of the things. And then if you only need to do this much, it's much less kind of discongruence when there's an issue one direction or another, because with the exception of a large event where we would also be affected as team members, it keeps it very in the same space and working with those same people.
That's interesting you say that. I feel like that's kind of what we're doing as well, to where we have professional therapists or psychologists that are coming to some of our quote unquote peer support post-incident debriefings.
Yeah.
But nobody talks about CISM anymore because they're afraid to go back to that term, because originally it was so negative and it was thought of as such just a waste of time with people who can't relate, which kind of brings me to the next thing. When you're talking about culturally informed clinicians, I feel like culturally competent, was the gold standard like less than a year ago. And now I'm seeing multiple people say, let's get away from that and get to this new verbiage, which makes people maybe more comfortable or more available. Different clinicians can be more available for that. And it was just a thought that's kind of what I hear now and kind of where we're headed.
I agree with you. I think we turned on a dime on that. I think the problem with culturally competent is there is a paramedic somewhere that doesn't think that I'm competent in their level of paramedicine, right? Well, with no swinging what contest. Like, I think my CV shows that I'm a pretty damn good paramedic and could probably go toe to toe with any other paramedic. By changing that to culturally informed, we widen that door. And we say, you don't need to have all the ribbons. You haven't need to do 2 tours in Schenectady, New York, right? You could just be someone who's knowledgeable about the profession and works within that space.
Was there a shortage? Was the problem that there wasn't enough of these culturally competent people, or was that not it?
And Jason can absolutely speak on the West Coast. I think on the East Coast, there were 2 things. There were individuals that had never been a paramedic, EMT, firefighter, what have you, that felt competent in the space because they'd worked with this profession for 20 years, right? And had really strong acumen there that suddenly didn't feel like they could fit per se. And then you just had individuals that were just confused as to the provider they were getting because they just didn't know what does competency mean to you versus me. And by changing that terminology to informed, we're just also allowing the dialogue to be a little smoother, right? So you're aware of first responders. You've worked with first responders rather than you've had to have been a first responder.
So do you have a group that you specifically are a part of or are going to be a part of? Like we have groups that we can reach out to. Is there a group of clinicians that you guys go to? And if so, how is it that you now decide, because we don't use this culturally competent verbiage anymore, how is it that you decide if they're kind of able to be a part of the group to make people comfortable who are still in the roles?
Totally. There is no formalized group in our neck of the woods. For example, like the first responders counseling certification, right? There's some individuals have taken that credential. That hasn't necessarily materialized out east in the sense of like, here's our gaggle of culturally informed clinicians. I think it's really a very elaborate phone tree that I'm honored to start to be on. We're a well-informed group, and I think it doesn't take more than a couple phone calls to be like, oh yeah, Bob's a PsyD out in West Natick, and he was in the military, or he did do this, or he did do that. So as far as the inclusion-exclusion criteria there, because there really isn't a formalized group to be a part of, I don't think we have too much of that.
Okay, so if there's, say, a fire department, or just because that's what we're talking about here with us, and there's a call where somebody feels like, hey, we should probably get a clinician involved here or a therapist involved here. How in your neck of the woods would they go about the phone tree, and then who would they know who to get besides just word of mouth?
Sure. So in our neck of the woods, as the head of the peer support team, I would give them 2 lists. I would give them our employee assistance program. And before everyone recoils, these are clinicians that we've already vetted to have proven to be culturally informed. So of the totality of the EAP counselors you could get, we've given you this much more narrowed down list. We also have a team psychologist who operates in our neck of the woods as that mainstay of this is the person who we go to when we need a clinician in our end. And additionally, we have probably 4 or 5 other individuals that are not formally part of our peer support team in any way, shape, or form, but have made themselves known on the culturally competent side of the coin. So, Jason, the shortest answer would be I would help that provider kind of navigate that process and help align them with one of those professionals.
So you said that you have informed clinicians on your EAP. I'm just impressed by that, because let me tell you, far from where we are out here.
That was what I'll say to be kind to all involved are that made a very big spreadsheet, a very small spreadsheet. And there was a ton of pushback from the EAP itself. Who are you? Why do you want this? How dare you accuse our clinicians of not being specialists, right? I completely understand, especially now as a counselor, I understand the reflexive pushback of that. But it was really telling to say, no. We need people who identify in this space. Are they trauma informed? Have they worked with first responders? Do they have a background in this industry? And as I mentioned, it really, really narrowed the list. But Jason, to your point, one of the biggest things I learned from it is you can do that. you're paying the EAP, maybe not you personally, right? But like as leadership goes up, you're paying your employee assistance programs a healthy sum of money to provide assistance for your employees, right? You are absolutely the consumer, and you absolutely have the right to, at a minimum, ask the question. And if anybody wants that like template that we use to start that dialogue, I'll send it your way. I have no problem with that. But I think it's important to remember that not only can you ask the leadership of the EAP to say, hey, distill this list down for me, listen to your providers. And this is a huge cultural shift, right? It involves talking a little bit about your experience in EAP, and a friendly reminder that none of your employees have to if they don't want to, right? I don't want to blur the lines of confidentiality, but if one of your guys comes back and said, man, that Dr. Bob was stellar, make note, right? Like talk to your EAP, see how you can better incorporate that person into your services. And conversely, when, Dr. Peter was awful, strike him off the list. Did you just, I don't want to say dox them, but you make sure that the EAP knows that that's not someone that your team wants to work with anymore, and you can kind of run those barriers. It's not easy, but it's definitely worth it.
I'll give you an idea of where we're at with the EAP. You'd be lucky to get them to answer the phone. So
yeah, that is a real. As I said, I do a fair bit of consulting with other programs, and never thought I would say my EAP was impressive. But we've actually had some agencies that have changed their vendor because we did what we always do in first response, right? Everybody, pardon my French, everybody complained, right? I caught myself. Everybody complained, everybody whined to one another. Oh, it's been 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, but nobody told leadership. And it was much easier for me as the consultant, if you were, but I get to go to leadership and say, hey, listen, the lived experience out there is when you call that 1-800 number, it's radio silence for 14 days. And understandably, thankfully, to the benefit of leadership, they said, well, that's unacceptable. And then they got to go back to my point earlier and say, listen, we're paying you guys a healthy sum of money. What can we do to make it different? Right. And again, it's not going to change Friday to Monday, but at a minimum, it tells your crews that you care. Right. And beyond that, can you start to affect change, and can you start to move in the right direction?
Hi, I'm Austin Folk, an engineer with the Ventura City Fire Department. I'm also on the board of the Ventura Fire Foundation, an organization that supports firefighters and their families. The foundation produces this podcast as part of our mission. I work with the foundation because I was witness to the help that it was able to provide to my family. The foundation needs your help. First, please subscribe and rate this podcast on your podcast platform. This helps us get a higher ranking and more visibility for the show. Second, if you support the podcast and the foundation's work, please consider donating. Every dollar helps us support firefighters and their families. There's a link in the show notes where you can donate through the website at www.venturafirefoundation.org. Thank you for listening.
I kind of want to switch gears on you a little bit. So I was having a conversation recently, and it started revolving around retired guys, right? Or gals. And because we're giving mental health and all these issues a lot of airtime and, some much deserved attention. And that's all good and well. But I've been hearing stories like, oh, you remember so-and-so, he retired and he got into really bad straits. And some of these guys move away from the area when they retire. So they're not like shoulder to shoulder with their people anymore. And I've heard that story several times. And then when people talk to them, they're like, oh, yeah, I was in bad straits. Or people have specifically listened to the podcast and go, yeah, I was a disaster and I wish I would have known. Or what's the push for like after people leave the first responder community? Because and in this, I'm talking a little bit from firsthand experience. Like I retired, like there is a lack of connection there, even though I'm still connected and we're doing this work with the foundation and whatnot. But there are other guys who are less connected. And I don't want to say like maybe they don't feel like they deserve the services that the fire department or the agencies are offering, but it's just weird. It's a weird dynamic. So yeah, I feel like I'm really good at not asking questions after I talk for like 2 minutes, but
I got it. I hear you.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, take it from there.
I think it's twofold. I think, and I will credit some of the fire services out there for doing this better and for starting to go down this pathway, and some of our law enforcement agencies are doing this as well. If you're a program that plans to do 20 and out, 25 and out, if your plan is to keep someone for a period of time and then allow them to retire rather than fire, rather than, whatever HR nonsense we say to people, you have an obligation to catch them a couple years before they retire and work them through the process of re-identifying their purpose, re-identifying their goals, making sure that we start to work with them on very much a mental health side of the coin to ensure that we understand what our next chapter is going to look like. Is that running a podcast? Is that staying within the fire service in some way, shape, or form? If so, great. But we all know, to your point, people that if they don't leave are the 60, 70, 80-year-old guy who's having coffee at the coffee table, 0600 every day, because they don't know what else to do. And I'm not throwing any shade at that individual in any way, shape, or form, but the idea that, like, this is what I did for 20 years, why am I not going to do it on Tuesday? So we really have to be proactive with our retirement resources for these individuals to make sure that that doesn't just feel like on Friday I worked here, Friday night they gave me a cake, and Monday I have nowhere to go. And additionally, absolutely. It's very verbose of me to assume that, agencies can afford that and can ensure that within their team. But can that be something you look into? Of you still very much get these services or an extension of these services as part of your severance, as part of your retirement? Can we ensure that if we can't keep you in our network, in our collaborate of mental health providers, can we transition you to another if you need it? And really taking more of a proactive approach than a reactive approach.
Yeah, I think it's great what you're saying. It's definitely not where we are, not in our area anyway. There's definitely a big gap between what you're describing and what the actual experience is. And I think that's a problem. It's a problem that needs to be addressed, but we're struggling to just take care of the guys that are actually doing the job. So like the guys that retire, like the priority is not there, right? Like if you have guys that are actively in crisis mode who are on the job. It's just interesting. It's interesting that the more airtime these topics get, the more nuanced, the more layers, the more it just gets more complex, which is
we're just starting to broach like the pre-retirement planning. And I think that's huge from what James is saying too. Like not only do you need to plan out who you're going to be and what you're going to do, but how much of your identity is wrapped up as, especially as EMS, firefighter, law enforcement. That's who you are to your core. And a lot of these guys, that's what they live and breathe. And when you retire, now what? And I think we're starting to talk about that, which is good. Now, I'll take it to the other side and go, okay, while we're working here, let's talk about some of the things that you see that we can change. So obviously there's like drinking stuff. And I know how unhealthy that is and coping by drinking. But can we talk a little bit about sleep deprivation, shift work, relationships? What is it that you see most of that you want to just strangle people and go, hey, this isn't a terrible fix. You can do this and your life is going to get way better. Give us some of those golden nuggets.
Yeah, man, all of it for sure. I think I actually recently gave a talk on real world resilience for healthcare providers. And it's the idea of some of the core tenets that we would tell a tax accountant are just as valuable for our fire emergency response and law enforcement personnel. We just don't think it is, right? It just doesn't work for us because it's different. One of the first things that I really encourage people to do, and I struggle with this every time I have to write a bio, is over the holidays, I want you to talk about yourself for 5 minutes and not mention the firehouse, the agency, or your job, right? And I'm just as guilty, man. I went to Walgreens the other day. I signed 637 as my ticket, right? Like that's my employee number. What am I doing? The idea that we can't decouple. Who are you? Oh, I'm paramedic James Boomhower. Shut up, dude. You're at a barbecue, right? Or your neighbor comes by to see how things are, and you're like, so there we were. Her leg was hanging off, right? And that's just not how the rest of the world communicates. So even starting with something as simple as slowly but surely recognizing that your identity and your profession are not identical. And we love that our colleagues identify as these people, and that's a valuable tool, but it cannot be our entire lived identity. The other big components are just going slow. 20 minutes more sleep is way more valuable than 20 minutes less sleep. One more meal with veggies and proteins and less carbs, right, is way more valuable than another bag of Cheetos. And I'm going to stay in my lane and not talk too much about nutrition. The other big thing that you can do today, tonight, coming from a German-Irish paramedic who can never tell you to not drink unless you have, some disordered relationship with alcohol, is move your alcoholic beverages from one alcoholic beverage to one glass of water. And if you can alternate alcohol, water, you'll lower your bar tab, you keep yourself hydrated, and that hydrated sleep that you get is going to let you fall into REM sleep. And REM sleep is really where the metaphorical magic happens when we talk about processing trauma, when we talk about excising stress, when we talk about a lot of these things. That all happens in REM sleep. And recognizing that you can, with the exception of disordered drinking excluded, have your cake and eat it too. You can still go to the bar, have a couple drinks. I just drank with a handful of buddies of mine a couple days ago. It was a beer, a water, a whiskey, a water, a non-alcoholic, because I like the non-alcoholic Guinness, and then a water, right? And you can do that now. We don't have to rag on each other, bust on each other, and allowing for a little bit more moderation in all of these aspects is really how we get there. And to your point, Jason, don't forget to move your body. The biggest thing I miss about working at my firehouse was the gym. Right. And I admittedly didn't use it often while I was a firefighter paramedic there. But many of our firefighter colleagues are staring at beautiful federally funded gyms, right, that are collecting dust on them. And you don't have to do a whole CrossFit workout. God bless you if you can, but get in there for 10 minutes. Watch the same show we were watching on the treadmill, right? Can you do small steps to keep those habits consistent?
So we ask most of the therapists, mental health experts that come on the show the same question. Hearing you talk, I feel like you come from a different perspective, which is good, which is encouraging. But if you had the magic wand and you could do one thing that made all of these mental health issues better, I mean, you literally could do anything you want. It doesn't have to be a mental health related thing. It could be anything you think would make an impact. What would you do?
It'd be two things. You would be assigned a mental health professional, just like you're assigned a primary care provider. So you would get one and the ability to flex if they weren't a good fit and all that jazz. And we would stagger our night shifts so you were guaranteed at least 72 hours of non-night shift work before you went back to nights. I know that ruins the 24/72s that we all know and love, but man, we know that not sleeping just is disastrous to our physical and mental health. And if I could give you a mental health clinician when you walk through the door with your polo shirt, with your Maltese cross, with your Star Life, and guarantee that you had fewer night shifts or fewer 24 rotations, that would be it.
Yeah, that's funny. Have you thought about this before? I can tell.
I have, yeah. I've written a couple papers on it. Yeah, for sure.
I think he was pretty close, Peter.
Yeah.
I think that's inclusive of what the other ones.
Yeah.
I know what you're going to say, and he fit right in there.
Yeah, everyone usually says just work less, but essentially, right, Jason? That's the gist of it.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. But I think the reason you work less is because a lot of it has to do with those nighttime sleep hours.
Yeah,
and which makes you a better husband or wife or partner and have a little more patience and all that stuff, all the way from top to bottom. Do you guys have 24? You work 24/72s? Is that what I heard you say?
So at MedSlate we're 12s. We're 12s,
but a lot of the people out there do.
Yeah. Okay. We are, especially in the HEMS community. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'd say it's probably split 50-50 agencies that work 24s or 48s in some fixed wing programs versus agencies that work 12s. We are simply too busy to entertain the process of 24s. And being an aviator, I'm not the aviator, but having to fall under some aviation restrictions, our duty time, our crew rest, things like that really stymie our ability to work 24s.
That's interesting that in the aviation world, they're very strict about how much you can work, how much you have to rest. But you go EMS, they're like, oh yeah, you need to work 7 days in a row.
Leave it out. But yeah, that's it, man. Go to work. Yeah.
You need to work 7 days with no sleep and drive this fire engine down the road and not kill somebody with it. No problem. Go for it. Yeah. That is wild. I do like your perspective though. Assign a mental health professional and sleep more. And honestly, my whole career was 24s. And at the end, we were doing 48, 96s. And, in between, you were working a bunch of days. In hindsight, I think I would have been happier on a 12-hour shift or something. And I know that some big giant fire departments have experimented with that, but obviously it's not normal here. I don't know any fire departments that do it around here, but that sleep is so valuable. It's so valuable. And there's studies out there, I'm sure you've read them, that like the lack of, they're starting to equate the lack of sleep with the increased cancer risk, because there's other professions that have equal exposure to carcinogens who don't have the cancer rates of people who are sleep deprived, i.e. law enforcement, fire department, EMS stuff, which is crazy to me. The other thing that's crazy to me is like, okay, so we kind of get it. It's becoming more clear, and it takes time to study these things. We're not reacting fast enough, right? But it is the government for, they don't do anything fast, but you think they would take this information and go, oh, this is a problem. We kind of know it's a problem. Okay, let's start doing something about it. But that's like, dreaming for the most part. But
and I mean, I'll be transparent because colleagues of mine and coworkers are hopefully going to listen to this. I love night shifts, and I used to work 36s, right? I'd come in Friday day, I'd leave Saturday night. I was 25, which I think is really, really important to say out loud. And B, I was a slob for the next day and a half, right? It worked. It was a beautiful schedule. I worked once, right? Like, hear me out. Worked once. 136 was done for the week. What person isn't going to love that schedule? But, we also don't just wet our beards and run into fires anymore. Like, we have to acknowledge some of the changes that we've made to better. I have to wear a helmet in the helicopter. 25 years ago, you didn't have to. Right? You just wore a headset that Jason's wearing, and you hope for the best. I mean, we make these changes because we know we have to. I don't know the right answer. Don't get me wrong. I wonder if an easy first step is to stagger the length. Can we adjust the standard Kelly schedule in a way that ensures that our fire professionals and EMS professionals that follow it get more days in between that 24-hour tour or that night rotation? I don't know the right answer, as it logistically falls to different fire departments, but we know that we at minimum have to sleep more, if not work nights less.
Yeah. Let's talk about, we have a grant that we got for the foundation, and part of that grant is going to fund you to come and teach our people some stuff. So let's give that a little plug. What are you guys going to talk about? What's that look like?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about mental health and wellness as it relates to our agency, and what does it look like in the real world. We're also going to spend a fair bit of time talking about resilience and the difference between resilience and resistance, alongside discussing like what Jason and Peter and I started to talk about was how does that look in the real world? How do we take the tools that we know are good for us, the good sleep, the eating, the moving our body, all this, that, and how do we actually make it tangible within our communities?
Gotcha. I do also want to talk about Stay Fit for Duty. So what exactly is it? What are you trying to do with it? Yeah, go into that if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So the goal of Stay Fit for Duty is to create avenues for first responders to treat their mental health with the same tenacity that they treat the individuals that they serve, right? If I told you all that there was a new fire apparatus that we had to learn, if I told you all there was a new protocol we had to learn for medication administration, we'd all be up till 2 a.m. doing it, right? We understand the importance of our job and how ready we have to be as first responders and healthcare providers to treat others. And what we do is we put ourselves on the back burner. And I'm really working through a number of different ways to reinforce that if we put ourselves, maybe not even first, but equal in importance to that we actually make ourselves better responders and better healthcare providers over time. We do that through engagements like this, podcast speaking, things of that nature. I am very fortunate that I've done a fair bit of public speaking on the national stage on the topic to increase awareness and to give some pearls and pitfalls. I do the CISM training, as Jason pointed out, and I do the peer support team education and creation. And we hope one day to have like a home base to actually do this in the therapy and kind of spool all of this together and do all that work in one place in real time.
Did you start that or soon to be nonprofit? Did you start that? Is it a conglomerate? How many are on staff with you?
It is me and 2 really good friends who volunteer to help. And as we are able to incorporate and make it a nonprofit, as you all know, that takes a fair bit of collaboration and a fair bit of dollars behind it. As we work to create that revenue and make that a nonprofit, we'll be happy to do so and kind of activate some of the other avenues that you can take with a nonprofit that you can't take with just an LLC.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. I know we're all looking forward to the webinar that you're going to do and give our people some actionable things that they can do. I mean, so much of this is I mean, this is just my opinion and as uneducated as it may be, but a lot of the mental health stuff is like root maintenance, staying on top of putting some self-care a higher priority in your life, and like being aware of what's going on so you don't get to the crisis times, which is, where people start thinking about suicide and other things like that. So I think any training we can give our people that like just give them more tips, more tools on things they can do in their everyday life is an immense amount of value. People just have to apply it, right? That's the hard part. It's not like people don't know.
Yeah, and we're trying to shorten that, right? We're trying to shorten the distance between that action and that available resource. I loved what you said. I want to add one piece to it. Well, prevention is it's the crux of everything, right? It's the best medicine. It's the best all this jazz. Coming to see a mental health professional is not reactive. Right. Finding yourself in a bad spot, finding yourself in trouble. You got some relationship problems at home. Work is really struggling. Your guys are noticing that you're different. Coming to see a mental health professional is still preventative, right? Crisis resources are still preventative. I don't want anyone to think like, oh man, I'm a little depressed. It's too late. I've missed this preventative window. It's not. It's all preventative. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Good point. Anything else you want to get out there before we wrap this up, or?
No, I just want to thank everybody for the venue. Thank Audra, Chelsea, and you guys for your patience as we had a number of scheduling snafus and some technical difficulties here. And please follow me on social media at stay_fit4duty or check out my website, stayfitforduty.org.
Yeah, we'll make sure we put the links in the show notes. Jason, how about you? You got anything for us?
I just wanted to reiterate what James said at the end there. What I try to tell my guys is just go once to a therapist. Just go once. Because I'll bet you're going to want to go back. But when you stay at the station and just talk crap, that for sure doesn't help. So just go once and see what you think and give it a shot. And most of the time, people find a lot of value and they go back. So anyway, I appreciate you being on here also, James. And I look forward to the webinar. So we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, guys. It was my pleasure. Take care.
Well, that was good episode. It's always good to hear from somebody who gets what we do and also is educated in the mental health world. It's weird to see those two worlds like completely cross over, but I think it was good. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's taking it to another level with what he's doing. He saw a need. He saw what was happening in his own history and his life, and he decided to step up and become the person the go-to guy. One of the things he said, my takeaway from this is go to a barbecue or whatever it is and talk about yourself for 5 minutes without mentioning anything about where you work. I thought that was pretty good. And I don't know of many firefighters who could do that. So
they wouldn't even have to open their mouth because everything on their t-shirt, their hat, everything would be like firefighter, everything,
Yeah, I'll say I'm guilty for sure.
Hey, so fun fact, James is coming back to do this webinar for our fire family. So what's the date? You got the date? I think it's February 20th.
February 20th, and that's thanks to Vanguard Charities. They donated to the foundation so that we could host James and he could do this webinar for us. So big thanks to Vanguard Charities. You can register in the show notes below.
Yeah, it's a series, so we're going to do one a quarter, and it was a grant that they awarded to us that's going to allow us to deliver this to our people. So we're super stoked about that. But anyhow, it's been awesome. Thanks for your time as usual, Jason, and until next time.
All right, see you soon.